Good evening, everyone. You don't understand. I could have had a class. I could have been a contender. I could have been someone. Instead of a bum, that's what I am. No, it's not confession time. It's Tuesday evening. There's your movie quote for the week. So let's see who can work out where that comes from first. So if I do it properly in the voice. You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been someone instead of a bum. That's what I am. So if you know what movie that comes from, pop it in the comments. First person, hey, get a prize. Why not? By the way, I've got a new friend. Got a new friend to help me out. Thought, let's bring some humour. Hey, waka waka waka. Yes. Hey, everybody, if you've got comments, I'll read them out. Yeah. Fuzzy bear. What's that? The comedian's a bear. Well, he is. So if you got comments, Fozzie will read them out. I will indeed. All those sorts of things. So welcome along. As always, we want to pay our tributes to the elders past, present, emerging of the Yagara and the Turrbal people who have cared for the land that we meet on in Southside. And we pay our respects to elders all over the world who have cared for the various lands that God has created. We pray that we as Christians will walk humbly and carefully on the land too. So good day to our usual people who are starting to roll in. Hello to anybody who tunes in later. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget, where did that movie quote come from? I could have been a contender. So I've just started reading this book, which will nicely be backwards to you. A Critical Approach to Youth Culture. It comes out of Youth Specialties. So Youth Specialties was a big organisation in America, started by Wayne Rice and Mike Yaconelli. Not Mark. Many, many years ago. Did a lot of publishing, ideas, books and stuff like that, and resources for youth ministry. So I've just started reading this, and part one looks at what is culture. So I thought we'd look a bit at that, and maybe as I talk it out will help my little brain to work it out, because it's starting to get into that philosophical stuff that my brain just... I have a math science brain, so when you get into this, oh, airy fairy, this is what culture is, my little brain goes, too many strange words that aren't just a yes or no. But so we'll have a bit of a chat about it. And it's that interesting thing. So we talk about youth culture and understanding youth culture. So it's helpful as we do a journey on that. And so the book will continue to look at how do we critique, how do we understand culture. And so we might draw on some of that as my reading goes on. So this is your chance to make sure I'm actually doing some reading as we look at the books I read. So we've looked at some in the past. This is this one. But of course we ask, what is culture? And the book starts with that. That's that interesting thing that different people define it in different ways. And I guess it reminded me of, for those who were at the leadership boot camp in April. So once a month on the third Sunday of the month, people get together and watch a training video. And because April's was in the school holidays, I said, hey, let's watch an Intergen one. And so we watched, well, at least part of a talk by Christine Embry from America. And she starts off by talking about what's called suitcase words. So suitcase words are those words that we use that have a whole heap of luggage or baggage inside them, and we read them in different ways. And so culture is one of those. If we say, let's talk about culture, my understanding of culture might not be your understanding of culture, which might not be the same as someone else's understanding of culture. So if we're going to explore what culture is, we need to define what is culture. And so they quote from 1870. I mean, it's got to be right. If it's 1870, oh yes, that's very nice. So E.B. Taylor, who defines culture as that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. So it's those whole parts of our society that come together. So it's not just you might talk about someone as, oh, they're very cultured because they go to the ballet and the opera and things like that. Yes, we've sat through Puccini and it was very lovely. I'm in a strange mood. I think this is because, Rod, you guys kept me up late last night, and when I am up late, then I get in silly moods. Maybe I should have more late meetings on Monday evenings, and these Tuesdays become more exciting. I need to have more late meetings on Saturday nights. One of the teenagers that comes along to our evening service said to me, or almost teenagers, said to me on Sunday, "Why is it never fun when I'm here? Mum tells me it's fun when I'm not here." So obviously we're doing an awesome job of connecting with him on a Sunday night. Not. But anyway, I'm all over the place tonight, aren't I? It's a shocker. So culture isn't just, that high-end stuff. And so culture is more than just the music and the movies that a young person might watch or experience. It's a whole broad part of society. Oh, I missed who you just liked. I have a feeling it might have been Rod. You're wanting to keep me up. That's what you're saying, aren't you? You've got lots of late night meetings. Just imagine what I'll be like after Boys Brigade camp. That'll be exciting. So they then quote, and I presume this name is correct. I love it. Ward Goodenough. If Goodenough isn't a bad last name, naming them Ward for the first name, it's all wonderful, isn't it? You're just going to thank your parents for that name. But Ward Goodenough talks about 7 senses or ways of visualizing culture. So there's various ways we can see culture. So these might all play into how we view the same sort of culture, or they might point to there's slightly different variations of culture in there. So let's look at these, and as I talk through, maybe you'll help me to understand what I was reading today. Yay! But yes, so these, because we come with our suitcase words and because we look at things differently, we might see culture in different ways. These are some of the ways we might be seeing culture. So one is it's a systems of standards. So since it frames a person's expectations for perceiving, believing, evaluating, and performing. These expectations serve as the guiding mechanism and offer a basis for judging what is appropriate thoughts and actions. So it's that sense of it's the systems that show us what is appropriate. So he goes into the whole dress thing. So it's that sense of, when I preach on Sundays in the morning, nice shirt, nice pants. Preaching in the evening, I can get away with a t-shirt because I'm preaching to there's a different set of standards, a different culture in that thing. When I was preaching the Upper Hunter, nice shirt, pants, tie. Because country, particularly some churches, conservative, there's a different culture. So it's those set of standards that we have that we can look around and go, oh, these are the standards we have to wear that. So we're talking on Sunday, how the culture in church has changed so that we sit there and none of the women were wearing hats. Good, I could make that comment. The one woman who always wears a hat at Yeronga wasn't there, so I could get away with comments about hats. Yes. And good that at least in the evening service I had one male wearing a hat. So it's those standards. And again, this is this sense of culture is not set, but culture moves. So the writer of this book, Pamela Irwin, talks about, cultures, or you could use the image of a river. And if you stand in the river flows past, and in that sense, it's no longer the same river as when you stood in it. The water, it's different water passing. Silt might have moved, some of the silt around your feet moved. It keeps moving. And so culture keeps moving. So if we talk about youth culture, don't think youth culture of the 60s. So we've talked about this before. And very much nowadays, don't think of youth culture. We'll get into, there's different subcultures. So culture can be looked at as what is the set of standards that people have to behave by to be part of this group. What do we do when we go to church? What do we do when we go to youth group? What do we wear? How do we behave? I'll have to use at an evening service. There's a lovely video that I don't have anymore because my computer died, but I can find on how to worship and what beats to clap and when to raise your hands, and it's just beautifully silly. So got to find a chance to. It's this week. We're all one. I don't think I can quite work it in, but I'll work it in at some stage. The second way of looking at culture is assigned character traits. So it talks about culture refers to specific attributes associated with or assigned to groups based on personal experience with members of the group. So we see people and we go, those sort of people are like that. So they use the example of a travel writer talking about going to Thailand and, oh yes, you could tell the Americans they were the ones in t-shirts and sloppy clothes. So therefore Americans are sloppy. Or we might say, oh, you can tell the American tourists they're the one with the cameras around your neck and talking loudly. Though that stereotype doesn't apply anymore because you don't put a camera around your neck, do you? I wonder if maybe they still do. Who knows? See, again, how culture changes. And so our stereotypes and our images have to change. But yes, so we can look at culture as what is the assigned characteristics that we see that other culture. So that's a way of looking at a culture outside of our own. We look at and go, well, what are the stereotypes? What are the characteristics that they have that we can see that is different to how we live out? Or maybe what are the things that are the same that we see they live out? Third is the operating culture. So they say, like an operating system loaded on your computer, an operating culture consists of those standards or systems that a society chooses to guide its own thoughts and actions, or the standards a person chooses to judge other people's behaviour by. So it's those things we choose to go, this is how we expect people to behave, which, in a sense, we're judging people against our culture. Are they fitting within our culture? These are the things we think are important. And if someone comes out from outside that culture, they stand out. Oh, you're not doing the things that we expect. I guess it's, an example from Sunday was speaking at Yeronga, and we had a woman come along who had family members back in Iran who passed away and wanted prayer, and so I nicely just shortly included her in the prayers of the people. And someone who I've discovered now was a visitor stood up and, there's this woman who's walked in off the street and wanted prayer and we need to pray for her. It's like, well, I just did. And they nicely sent me an email going, sorry about that, but we need to pray fervently, and quoted some bit out of the King James about how we should, what praying fervently was. And I thought, I'm sure I talked about in the sermon I don't like King James, but there you go. You might be throwing a point at me. But we had bounced a couple of emails back and it's all fine. It's like, you can interrupt. It was nice to see lots of people talking. See, here I can get sidetracked. So we had this woman come along, and here's this God moment. God does amazing things. So she's come from Iran. She's here with her son who's studying, and family member has just passed away of COVID. And so she's in deep mourning. And here we were, Yusuf had swapped on to do audio visual this week, and he's just recently gone through having his father pass away back in Syria, and I think again from COVID. So he was able to sit and talk with her, and a bunch of others sat and prayed with her after the service. It's like, that's how we do it. God was in the house and going, we've got it all sorted. Team people up. But yes, so for this person, hang on, his way of reading culture is, you pray fervently, you have this long, probably laying on of hands and all these words. Whereas for us, our culture is, well, we slip it in nicely at the end of the prayers of the people. So I just pray, pray for Roya and her family, support them at this time. And fine for us, probably not the culture of the church he came from. So we judge from the set of standards that we choose to be important for us. Number 4, we can look at public culture. So public culture refers to those specific groups of thoughts and actions that are expected in a public social arena or of society. And here we get this challenge that young people face, that they are in multiple arenas. So they are at home, they are at school, they might be in a separate friend group, they might go to church. You've got these different cultures and different expectations. And this is one of the challenges for young people, is trying to work out their identity in multiple cultures. And you can imagine even bigger when you're looking at cowled youth. So they're coming from another cultural background, or they might have been born in Australia, parents born overseas in another culture, and the parents trying to hold on to their culture, and the young people being torn between, how do I be an Australian? How do I hold on to the culture behind that's come, like my family comes from? Where does all that mixed into, what do I do with the culture at school? What do I do with the culture at church? What do I do with the culture in my family group, in my friendship group? So those public cultures, which are the places we fit in. And yes, we might learn to juggle them, and they're not as pronounced. For us, for young people, they're really pronounced, because they're trying to work out their identity, and suddenly they're trying to work out, what's my identity in this cultural group, this cultural group, and this cultural group. Number 5, a set of public cultures. So in most societies, there are multiple public cultures. And so you can refer to these as subcultures. And that's what we see in youth culture today. So in the 60s, there was youth culture. You know, your James Dean type person, the Fonz, you know, they were youth culture. Today, you've just got multiplicity of subcultures, particularly started with Gen Y. Gen Y became very tribal, and so, you know, you'd talk to young people, late 90s, early 2000s, and so you talk about the jocks and the preps and the emos and the cool kids and the nerds, and you more and more. You had all these groups that formed part of youth culture. You had the goth youth culture, the emo youth culture, the preppy youth culture, the jock youth culture. Not Jock Dunbar. I'm sure his youth culture is really cool. I'm getting silly again. You've got to stop me. But yes, and so this challenge of where are you, and this is the challenge for the church and youth ministry. We can't just step out into a culture or a youth culture. There are numerous subcultures, and so you need to do that deciding, do we try and hit a bunch of cultures or do we hit one? So you hear of some groups that go, okay, we'll have different groups that meet during the week with our youth that hit different subcultures. Stuff like that. The Sixth Sense, no, not the movie, The Sixth Sense that is mentioned by Goodenough. Sorry, just love the name. Refers to the culture of a given society in its broadest sense. In other words, culture refers to the totality of all cultures within a society. And so they use the example of Latino culture. And if you hear Esteban speak, sometimes he'll talk about, you know, I'm a Latino, which encapsulates all that sort of Central South America, sort of Latino type things. So Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, all that area, who obviously have their own cultures, but also are summarised in that Latino culture. Those things that are similar between all of those people groups, and you can do that with other big groups. But that's the example I used, and I went, hey, I can, yep, we see that. And so we can look at these subcultures. We can look at the things that are part of a bigger culture, a huge culture. And then the seventh sense he talks about is the cultural pool, which is, in that sense, everything in humanity that can be drawn on as culture. So you can go to the absolute extreme of what is culture. Well, it's everything that human beings, all those things that people do. Does that hurt your head? Hurt my head. I think it's talking it through now helping a bit. So we look at culture in different ways. We can look at it from ourselves, going, what is the rules that we have and how do those that are coming in not follow those rules? We can look externally and go, well, what are the decisions that this group has made and the characteristics of this group that makes that their culture? We can look at ourselves and go, what is the systems we have in place that help to inform our culture? We can go, what are the public cultures in this area of my life? What are the subcultures that I'm a part of? So all these different things. They then move on in chapter 2 to talk about what makes culture culture. And so they talk about culture is about the human potential for ideas, that humans innately come up with ideas. We do that. And so culture allows that space. And so we naturally come up with ideas and we make choices. We choose what we see as important. We choose out of a range of potential ideas. And so it's that sense that culture chooses what is the ideas that we're going to hold on to. So again, culture is not static. Culture is that choosing of ideas, and those ideas will change. It's the struggle of youth ministry. They say in this book, we're not going to analyse youth culture because as soon as it would have gone to print, it would be out of date. But culture is about that ideas. Number 2, culture is about people assigning meaning. So culture rests on society choosing from a great arc of human potentialities of ideas what causes a society to choose one particular idea while another chooses an opposing idea. Grants and others contend the culture is organised around those ideas that a society values. So culture comes around, what do we value? What do we see as important? What gives us meaning? And you see that that's why we have all these youth subcultures, because, well, what gives this group meaning is different to what gives that sort of person meaning. And so you have splintering subgroups. Yes, yeah, you could. A broader example of that, look at churches. What is meaningful in baptism in one church? We don't do that sort of baptism over there because that's not meaningful there. So culture is about working out what is meaningful and what makes us meaningful. Number 3, culture is about socially consistent patterns of behaviour. So it's that obvious sense of we need culture is about how do we build up patterns so we know who's a part of our culture, who's a part of us. So we build up patterns so that, yes, we can recognise others. Number 4, culture is an historical, they have an A instead of an historical phenomenon. So it happens, you have a space of time, this is the culture here, and it changes and moves, and this is the culture here. But it takes part in history. Yeah, so you have to get history in there somewhere. 5, culture is creativity. So as we grow, as we expand, as we view new ideas, our culture changes and is dynamic. And 6, culture is about problem solving. So we see these problems in life, we come up with our problems, and we create this culture of how we're going to deal with it. How do we find this space? We feel alienated, we create a culture. And I guess, yeah, to some degree, that's the Gen X, the aloof, latchkey kids were labelled Gen X because they had no meaning, and we went, well, live into that. We are this. You cannot define us. We will be indefinable. We will be our own thing. And number 7, culture is a guidance system. So again, it just helps us to know how we're functioning. So, yeah. So we've got to start with, once we look into youth culture, understanding it's this huge, multifaceted thing. That if we want to understand culture, there's numerous ways of understanding it. Is it just a set of rules that procedures that we follow? Is it those subcultures that we're looking at? Is it the public face that we put on in this thing? So what is the culture of our church? So yes, so you can, this is clicking my head. you can talk about what's the culture of Southside, which is, the way we function, the rules around that. And in your head would be quite different than a conversation about what's the culture of the Uniting Church. That's more, what's the bigger ethos of the Uniting Church? What are the things that we hold and value? You're not going to get the same sort of things in there as, well, what is the culture of Southside? We meet together, we have morning tea after the services, and we are relaxed in the evening service, we do this and that. Hopefully that's helping you to think through that. Yes, there's different levels of culture, or there's different ways of looking at culture. And then, yes, Yes. So we'll continue as I read this book. Hopefully we'll come up with some good things to share. Might be a total flop, and next week we'll do something else, but that's all right. But yes, it's helpful for us to be asking, what is the culture we're connecting with, and how do we understand youth culture? So not necessarily, as I said, this book isn't going to tell us what youth culture is at this point in time, because A, it was written about 10 years ago, and B, even if it was written today or yesterday, it's today and it would be changed. But this will help us to think about, how do we engage youth culture? How do we read youth culture? Hopefully some things to get you started with. No one's worked out where we got. I could have been a contender. Should I tell you, or should I wait for next week? Let's wait for next week in case someone during the week can remember. So I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been someone, but instead I'm a bum. That's what I am. Could be the story of a youth ministry person. Could be a quote from a movie. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully, again, that's a bit helpful. Obviously, as we read more of the book, or as I read more of the book, and you sit there and listen, hopefully we'll unpack more and understand more. But yes, trying to understand that culture. Thanks for joining us. Pop comments, like it, send it off and share it with others if you think that's appropriate. Otherwise, find me questions if you've got questions, or I will just see you around. Have a good one. Bye, everybody.